interesting presentation from CMHC about the housing market, and it is helpful to understand the economic environment in which we are trying to meet the deep need for a greater number and a mix of types of housing for our citizens, both for today and tomorrow. And so it's my task to explain the policy environment recently set in play to facilitate developing housing. Policy intended to nudge the players in the needed direction to create the kind of housing we're looking for. And so we wanted to refresh your memories on the key elements of Bill 108 before the panel gets into any kind of detail and discussion. So after my presentation, you will have a panel discussing their perspectives on what we can do. So I think it's important to remind ourselves about why we plan. This is not just red tape, but a way to balance economic activities or developments with social needs and goals, environmental capacity, and financial capacity. Planning is about achievement of a community's preferred physical future. So the next series of points are the provincial stated goals for Bill 108. So first, the goal of the bill was to create more housing of types and sizes people need to help make home ownership and renting more affordable and give people more choice. To create options for the missing middle, whether that middle is a middle cost or a middle density. It intends to speed up local planning decisions and make the appeals process more efficient. It also is intended to stimulate more additional units on a property, and it is intended that housing should have access to transit because there are many who do not have automobiles and need to get to work or other kinds of appointments. The intent also is that municipalities are urged to implement community planning permit systems which would streamline the planning approvals process, chiefly at major transit areas, which is now the only location where inclusionary zoning can be designated. It intends to simplify how funds are collected for community benefits, such as parks and daycares, and to that end, the province has created a new tool called the Community Benefit Charge. It's for softer services, while development charges will be limited to hard services. We will discuss more about this a little later, because getting to this simplicity is going to take a lot of complexity. The province also believes, the province also believes that these changes will make upfront development costs easier to predict and give communities and developers more certainty. So then, moving on to a slide that is not mine. Okay, we've talked about that. We've talked about that. And I'm just going to forge ahead. In front of you, you should now see a bunch of bubbles. That the central bubble would be housing, and around it are a number of elements that we're going to be talking about. So to get to these housing goals, several parts of the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act were amended. Bubbles. And as well, the Provincial Policy Statement is under review, and we're going to focus on these specific areas of change. So first, let's look at the changes to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act. And although Bill 108 still maintains the ability to appeal based on consistency and conformity as a test, it no longer limits appeals to just that test. An appellant now can appeal based on land use planning reasons, and frankly, this is our sector's biggest disappointment, because the LPAT will hear these appeals using de novo hearing, which means a hearing fresh from the start, and in essence, it is now a substitute decision maker for council. And is this approach less time-consuming and expensive than the conformity and consistency test? Well, it's going to be hard to say, because it never actually came to its full fruition, because it was actually trying to grapple with a backlog of de novo style hearings. So the minister offered us the opportunity to re-engage in this in 12 months, so I'm sure we will have that conversation again. Now, third-party appeals to subdivisions are not possible, and the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act empowers the tribunal to set rules and require that parties participate in mediation or other dispute resolution processes. And again, the efficacy of this mandatory mediation will be proven over time. So turning to the Development Charges Act, items eligible for development charges are hard services and infrastructure, and the charge can now be at 100%, not the 80% apportioned value. Full capital costs of waste diversion and emergency EMS are now eligible. Soft services, as I said, like childcare or libraries, recreation centers, have been removed from the development charge and moved over to the community benefit charge. And many redevelopment, institutional, or infill developments are now exempt from development charges. And the transition to the new rates are spelled out in the Development Charges Act. The community benefit charge is under the Planning Act. And the bill deleted the existing Section 37 regarding bonusing and introduced the community benefit charge. But what are the details about this charge? What will be permitted and at what value? This is a formula based on land value, which will now determine a maximum charge. And community benefit charges, which you'll also hear called CBCs, are intended to cover soft services. And in order to participate in this tool, municipalities will have to develop a plan that explains how soft service expansion is related to growth. And various groups right now in consultations are working on determining how these calculations can be made since the acts relate charges to the value of land, but many services are more easily understood as a per capita cost. So consultation, I believe, closed today, and we are expecting a regulation in the fall. Parkland dedication is impacted, so if you have a community benefit charge, parkland would be included in that charge. However, if you don't have a CBC, you can still have parkland dedication with subdivisions, and it can be accepted as land or money. The bill also, though, removed the alternate density-based calculation for parkland. So moving on to the Planning Act. The Planning Act permitted additional units, second units, in a dwelling or an accessory building. So you would have a maximum of 2 units on a lot. Bill 108 permits additional units with a potential for 3 units on a lot, and it makes it clear that the owner does not need to live in one of the properties. Regulation is also forthcoming that will provide the necessary details about implementing that. The draft regulation indicated 1 parking place per unit, including tandem parking. So the bill changed the way community planning permit system and inclusionary zoning will be used. Community planning permit system, also CPPS for short, also is called the development permit system in other places, is a way to integrate official plans, zoning, subdivision, and site plan control into a single area and process so that the appeals and approvals are dealt with at that stage. So once it's passed, the developer has a much clearer set of expectation, and the approvals times are much shorter. Inclusionary zoning is an overlay on your zoning bylaw that identifies where lower cost housing should be targeted, and it was a way to identify where neighborhoods could sustain additional units. Now the minister has the right to impose the CPPS around major transit areas and use inclusionary zoning in those areas. And as I said before, it appears that's the only place where inclusionary zoning can now be placed. So shorter timelines are also part of the Bill 108 package, and this is timelines for making decisions on planning applications. So for example, the time to make a decision about an official plan amendment has reduced from about 7 months to about 4 months. And these changes make it essential to only accept complete applications. It also means that municipal practices for processing development applications may have to be reviewed. Public consultation may need to be compressed. So finally, on the PPS, these are only a look at the housing-related parts. First, there's a new definition. It is not housing types, but housing options. So the list of kinds of housing has grown, and the definition now refers to types of ownership. And there are new housing goals that refer to market-based need for demographics and employment, and this is not just for large municipalities, it is for all municipalities. The policy underlines the need to have a housing plan which addresses affordable housing, development that is transit supportive and promotes intensification. And also, in order to develop housing, infrastructure needs to be planned for, if not already in place. The PPS proposal provides a better understanding of where housing can be built if infrastructure is limited, partial, or non-existent, which is called the servicing hierarchy. And there is a new emphasis on changing climate, and it is not just about right-sizing infrastructure, but also being willing to say no to putting development in hazard lands, which is always difficult because those tend to be the most picturesque places for development. So there's lots more in the PPS that you would want to look at, but that's what pertains to housing. So last week, AMO released a comprehensive policy paper called Fixing the Housing Affordability Crisis. It identifies actions for all governments and private developers to work together to increase the housing supply, and certainly the province has acknowledged that there will be continuing work and conversation, and we hope that you take a look at this work on the AMO website. So in conclusion, Bill 108 and the proposed PPS have made changes to the legislative, regulatory, and policy system. They reduce decision-making timelines, they change how growth will pay for growth, and it opens the door for a greater variety of options. Is this enough? What else dictates the success of these goals? Well, our panel will address these questions and more. So thank you for listening to this very high-level review of Bill 108. And now it is my privilege to introduce Karen Redmond, who is the chair of Waterloo Region, having been elected in October 2018. She's been dedicated to public service for more than 20 years and has represented her community at several levels of government, including the federal, municipal, and Board of Education. And prior to being elected chair, she served on the Regional Council as a representative from the City of Kitchener. Karen has a master's degree in political science as well as an honors bachelor degree in English, and among her professional endeavors, she served as the executive officer for Habitat for Humanity in Waterloo Region. So I give you Karen Redmond.